Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're looking for something that speaks to your heart, something that lifts you up in the middle of whatever you're facing. And I want you to hear this today, loud and clear. Don't worry. I know it might seem like the world is spinning a little faster than you can keep up with, that the weight of the world is on your shoulders and the pressure feels unbearable. But listen to me. Don't worry. You're sitting there right now. I know you are, probably with that look in your eye. You've been through it. You've carried burdens that no one even knows about. You've wrestled with fears that seem impossible to overcome. And I'm not here to give you some cookie cutter feel-good message today. I'm here to remind you of a truth that if you grab hold of it, can change everything. God's got it. And if you let that truth settle into your spirit, it's going to shift your entire perspective. Look, there's something powerful that happens when we stop trying to carry things that were never meant for us to carry in the first place. You're not meant to be the one who solves it all. You're not meant to be the one who fixes everything. There is a place in this world that only God can fill. And when you try to step into that place, you're just creating more chaos for yourself. You're walking around with burdens that were never yours to bear. Don't worry. God will solve it. Now, let me tell you why that's such a big deal. Because when you try to solve everything on your own, what you're really doing is you're taking all the pressure on yourself. And trust me, you were never designed to carry that pressure. When you try to control every little thing, when you try to make sure everything lines up perfectly according to your plan, you're living under the illusion that it's all on you. And that will drain you. It'll burn you out. It'll make you feel like you're fighting a battle that's bigger than you are. But here's the truth, friend. You don't have to fix it. And here's the next part of that truth. You can't. You can't do it on your own. That's where God steps in. That's where His strength comes in. That's where His power takes over. And when you stop carrying the weight of everything and hand it over to Him, that's when you start experiencing peace that you can't explain. That's when you start seeing problems get solved in ways you could never have imagined. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to have a solution to every problem, every situation, every challenge you're facing. God will solve it. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You're sitting there, maybe even shaking your head, thinking, that's easy for you to say. You don't know what I'm going through. Maybe you've been up all night stressing over a decision you have to make. Maybe there's something in your life right now that feels impossible to fix. Maybe you've been praying and praying, but it feels like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. Here's what I want you to know. You're not alone. I know that feeling, that moment when you wonder if God's even hearing you. I know that moment when you feel like the pressure is about to break you. But I'm telling you right here, right now, God is working behind the scenes. Even when you can't see it, even when you can't feel it, He's moving. He's doing what only He can do. And I promise you, He's not going to leave you in the middle of this mess. So stop trying to figure it all out. Stop running in circles trying to come up with the perfect plan. Because guess what? You don't need to. You need to trust that God will solve it. He will step in and do what only He can do. And that thing you're worried about, it's not too big for Him. That problem that's keeping you up at night, it's nothing compared to the power He has. Think about it. If God can speak the universe into existence with just a word, don't you think He can handle your problems? If He can part the Red Sea and send His people through on dry land, don't you think He can make a way for you when it seems like there's no way? If He can raise the dead to life, don't you think He can breathe new life into your situation? Stop making your God so small. Stop limiting what He's capable of based on your own understanding of what's possible. If you only knew what He was planning for you, you'd stop worrying about the things that are stressing you out right now. God will solve it. But here's the deal. Sometimes you've got to let go of the need to control everything. Some of you are holding on so tight to your problems that you're not even giving God the space to work. You're so focused on the solution that you're missing the miracle that's happening in the process. God doesn't just want to solve your problem. He wants to transform you in the process. He wants to teach you something. He wants to stretch your faith. And sometimes that means you've got to release your grip and let Him work. You've got to believe that God will solve it. You've got to trust that He's got this. You've got to stop looking at your circumstances and start looking at the God who's bigger than those circumstances. The answer to your problem is not in your own strength. It's in His. The breakthrough you're praying for is not something you can make happen on your own. It's something He will bring about. And the minute you stop trying to make it happen yourself, the minute you stop forcing things and trying to control the outcome, that's when God can step in and do the impossible. You're sitting there right now thinking you don't have enough resources. You're thinking you don't have enough time. You're thinking you're not equipped to handle what's coming your way. And I get it, but that's the beauty of this whole thing. You don't have to be enough. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be qualified. All you need is faith. Faith that God will solve it. Faith that He will come through for you. And faith that no matter how big your problem seems, He is bigger. And listen, don't let anyone tell you it's too late for you. Don't let anyone tell you you've waited too long or that your situation is beyond help. Because I've seen God move in ways that are beyond explanation. I've seen Him take situations that seemed impossible and turn them around in a heartbeat. Don't let anyone put limits on what God can do in your life. God will solve it. Here's the bottom line. This is where your peace comes from. It doesn't come from you having it all figured out. It doesn't come from having the perfect solution. It comes from knowing that no matter what you face, God's got you. It comes from knowing that He is in control and you don't have to carry the weight on your own. So right now in this moment, I want you to make a choice. I want you to choose to stop worrying. I want you to choose to trust that God will solve it. Whatever it is, whatever you're facing, whatever you're carrying, God will solve it. And when you let go and trust Him, that's when you'll experience the peace that passes all understanding. That's when you'll see God do what only He can do. Don't worry, He's got it. We often live with a sense of urgency, like time is slipping through our fingers and we have to make things happen now. It's easy to get caught up in the pressure of the moment and feel like the timing of our life is out of sync with what we expect. We want answers, solutions, and breakthroughs immediately. But here's the truth. God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't align with our timeline. When you're in the midst of struggle or waiting, it's natural to think, why isn't this happening now? Maybe you've been praying, working, and doing everything you know to do, and yet the breakthrough seems far away. But God doesn't work on the same clock that we do. He doesn't rush things, and He certainly doesn't operate according to the deadlines we set for ourselves. And that's a good thing because His timing is always better than ours. We tend to think of time in terms of minutes and hours, and we measure progress by what we can see right now. But God sees the bigger picture. He sees the whole map while we're focused on the tiny part we're standing in. What feels like a delay might be part of a bigger plan you can't yet understand. Sometimes the waiting isn't just about the outcome. It's about what God wants to do in you during that time of waiting. Trusting God's timing means recognizing that He is never late. He's never behind. He doesn't miss a thing. There are moments in our lives when we feel impatient, like we've been waiting too long, but God knows exactly when to show up. Maybe right now, you're waiting for a breakthrough in your finances, your relationships, your health, or your career. And every day that passes without a change, you feel like you're losing hope. But when we trust God's timing, we can rest knowing He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything to align at just the right moment. There are stories in the Bible that illustrate this perfectly. Look at Abraham, for instance. He was promised a son, but God's timing wasn't in Abraham's time. He had to wait for years before the promise was fulfilled. And during that waiting period, he learned patience, trust, and obedience. God didn't forget about him, and he didn't forget about you either. What you see as a delay may be God working in ways you can't yet comprehend, preparing you for what's ahead. Remember, God's delays are not denials. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's never going to happen. Trusting his timing is the key to moving from frustration and worry to peace and expectancy. When you stop worrying about the clock and start trusting that God's timing is perfect, you open yourself up to the possibility that he's doing something even greater than you imagine. You might not see it today, but keep trusting and waiting, because his timing will always come through at just the right moment. We all have this innate desire to control the things around us. Whether it's the way we manage our careers, our relationships, or even the small details of our daily lives. Control gives us a sense of security. But here's the thing. Some things were never meant for us to control. The more we try to manage every situation and manipulate the outcome, the more we find ourselves frustrated and overwhelmed. We start to carry burdens that were never ours to carry, all in the name of control. But here's the powerful truth. When you release control, you make room for God to move in ways you never thought possible. We often feel like we have to be the ones to figure everything out, to plan every step and ensure that the outcome is exactly what we want. But God doesn't need us to control the process. He is perfectly capable of handling it himself. The truth is, when we let go of trying to control every aspect of our lives, we allow God to do what only he can do. The moment we stop trying to manage and manipulate, we open up the space for his miraculous intervention. This doesn't mean we sit back and do nothing. It doesn't mean that we abandon our responsibilities or stop making decisions. But it means that we trust God with the outcomes, knowing that he is sovereign over all things. We need to release the anxiety of controlling the future, release the pressure of having all the answers right now, and place it in God's hands. The moment we stop trying to control what's beyond our ability is when we start to experience true peace. It's also important to realize that our desire for control often comes from a place of fear. We fear the unknown, we fear failure, and we fear what might happen if things don't go according to plan. But in trying to control every aspect of our lives, we're simply allowing fear to dictate our actions. Fear tells us that we need to be the ones in charge, that we need to hold everything together. But faith tells us that God is already in control. Faith tells us that we don't have to have all the answers because he's already working things out for our good. When we give up control, we step into a space of trust where God can guide us with his wisdom and strength. This is where real transformation begins. When we stop trying to force outcomes and start releasing control, we begin to see God's hand at work in ways we could never have orchestrated ourselves. What feels like chaos to us is often God working behind the scenes, aligning things in a way that's better than anything we could have imagined. And the best part is, he doesn't need our help to make it happen. His power doesn't depend on our ability to control. It's in our surrender that his strength is made perfect. Let go of the need to control everything. Stop carrying the weight of every decision, every situation, and every fear. Trust that God's got it, that he's working on your behalf, and that he will do what only he can do. When you release control, you make space for God to move in ways that will blow your mind. When we're facing challenges, it's easy to limit God based on our understanding of what's possible. We tend to think that if we can't figure it out, or if we can't see how something will work, then it must be impossible. But that mindset, that limiting belief, is not only an obstacle for us, it's a barrier we place between ourselves and God's power. God does not work according to our limitations. He doesn't see things the way we do. And the possibilities in his hands are far greater than anything we could imagine. So often we hold back in faith because we look at our circumstances and base our expectations on what we think is achievable. We look at our bank account and think, there's no way this dream is going to come to life. We look at our relationships and think, there's no way we can fix this. We look at our health and think, this situation is beyond repair. But here's what we forget. With God, all things are possible. What seems impossible to us is just another opportunity for God to show up in ways that will leave us in awe. We tend to place limits on God because we look at situations through the lens of our own understanding and resources. We make our faith conditional on our ability to make things happen. But the reality is that God doesn't need us to have it all figured out. In fact, it's when we recognize that we don't have the answers that God can step in and show us the miraculous. The limits we place on God often come from our own self-doubt or our lack of understanding of His power. But the more we learn to see Him as the limitless, all-powerful Creator, the more we begin to expect the impossible to happen. We've all heard stories of impossible situations being turned around. Whether it's someone getting an unexpected financial breakthrough or a relationship being restored against all odds. Those stories aren't just random acts of good fortune. They are the result of God working beyond our understanding, beyond the natural order of things, and beyond the limits we try to place on Him. God doesn't have a plan B. When things go wrong, He has a plan that will always work out according to His will, and He can make a way when there seems to be no way. Imagine the Israelites standing at the edge of the Red Sea, trapped between an impenetrable body of water and the Egyptian army bearing down on them. In the natural, they had no way out. There was no way they could cross the sea, and there was no way they could fight the army. But God didn't work within the limitations of what seemed possible. He parted the sea, made a way where there was no way, and delivered His people in a way that no one could have predicted. That same God is at work in your life today, and He can make a way for you when it seems impossible. When we stop limiting God to what we think is possible, we open ourselves up to a whole new realm of possibilities. He is not bound by the things that bind us. He doesn't follow the rules we've set for ourselves or the timelines we've established. His power is limitless. And when we begin to align our faith with His unlimited power, we start to see things change in ways we couldn't have even dreamed of. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. When we release our limited thinking and begin to trust in His ability to do the impossible, we open ourselves up to a whole new level of faith and expectancy. When you stop limiting God, you begin to see that the possibilities are endless, and what He can do in your life is beyond anything you could ever imagine. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when we stop trying to control the outcomes of our lives. It's a peace that doesn't depend on whether we have all the answers or have figured everything out. It's a peace that comes from trusting in something much bigger than ourselves. Knowing that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And when you start to understand this truth, something shifts within you. You stop running on empty, trying to manage every detail. And instead, you start resting in the fact that God's got it. The world tells us that peace comes when everything is in order, when all the problems are solved, when we're in control. But true peace doesn't come from external circumstances. It comes from a deep internal knowing that God is in control and that He is with us no matter what's happening around us. This is a peace that doesn't depend on our own ability to solve problems, but on God's ability to work in and through every situation. It's easy to get caught up in the whirlwind of life, especially when things aren't going as planned. When you're facing a crisis, it feels like everything is out of your control. You can get stuck in a cycle of worry, constantly trying to figure out how to fix things, how to make it all right. But here's the truth, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to have all the answers. That pressure, it's not yours to carry. God wants you to surrender that weight to Him. And in doing so, you'll find the peace that only He can give. This peace doesn't mean you stop caring about the outcome. It doesn't mean that you stop taking action or making decisions, but it means that you stop carrying the anxiety that comes from believing that everything depends on your efforts alone. It means that you choose to trust that God will lead you, that He will guide you, and that He will take care of the things that are out of your hands. And that trust, it's the foundation for a peace that surpasses all understanding. When we surrender to God and let go of our need to control, we make room for His perfect peace to flood our hearts. This peace doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from knowing that even in the midst of the storm, God is right there with us. The peace He offers isn't about everything going perfectly. It's about the assurance that He's in control, even when it feels like nothing makes sense. Think about the disciples in the boat with Jesus during the storm. The waves were crashing, the wind was howling, and it seemed like they were going to drown, but Jesus was asleep. He wasn't worried, He wasn't frantic, because He knew that He was in control of the situation. And when He calmed the storm, He didn't just calm the water, He calmed their hearts. That same peace is available to you today. It's a peace that says, no matter how big the storm, I know that God is bigger. This is the kind of peace that changes everything. It's not the kind of peace that's dependent on having everything figured out or on having all the answers. It's the peace that comes from trusting that God has it all under control and that He is working all things together for your good. And when you begin to rest in that, when you stop worrying about how everything will turn out and just trust that God will take care of it, that's when you'll experience the kind of peace that truly changes your life. Faith is one of the most powerful forces in the world, but it's often the most misunderstood. We talk about faith, we hear sermons on faith, and we read about it in Scripture, but when it comes to actually living it out, it can feel difficult, especially when we're faced with challenges. We want to believe that everything will work out, but the pressure of circumstances can make us question whether God really has a plan for us. The key to unlocking God's power in your life is simple, but it's not just any kind of faith. It's faith that believes even when everything around us says it's impossible. What faith does is open the door for God to do what only He can do. Faith is what activates God's power in our lives. It's easy to rely on our own strength, our own abilities, and our own understanding to navigate life. But the truth is, our strength is limited. Our understanding is finite. When we lean on our own abilities, we often find ourselves overwhelmed and frustrated. But when we put our trust in God and exercise faith, we allow Him to step into our situation and move in ways that we can't even imagine. Faith is not a one-time decision, it's an ongoing process. It's a choice we make every day to trust God even when we don't see how things will turn out. It's a decision to believe that He is good even when life doesn't feel good. It's believing that His promises are true even when circumstances seem to suggest otherwise. And here's the thing about faith. It's not about having all the answers. It's about trusting God even when we don't have all the answers. It's knowing that even when we can't see the way forward, God already knows the way faith. Faith also means we stop limiting what God can do based on our own understanding of what's possible. We put God in a box when we start thinking that He can only work within the boundaries of what we believe is achievable. We look at our situations and think, God can't do that, or I don't think He'll come through for me this time. But God operates outside the confines of our logic and reasoning. He's not bound by the limitations we place on Him. He is the creator of the universe, and His power knows no bounds. When we align our faith with His limitless ability, we start to see the impossible become possible. Faith doesn't just change our circumstances, it changes us. It changes the way we look at challenges, the way we approach life, and the way we see God. It helps us shift our focus from what's wrong to what's possible. It helps us see beyond our present struggles and remember that God is working on our behalf. When we live by faith, we stop focusing on our limitations and start focusing on God's greatness. We stop worrying about what we can't do and start trusting in what He can do. The power of faith is that it opens the door for God's will to be done in our lives. It's not about forcing our own desires or pushing our own plans. Faith allows us to submit to God's perfect plan, trusting that His ways are better than our own. And when we choose to live by faith, we are giving God permission to work in our lives in ways that we never could have imagined. It's through faith that we see God move mountains, heal brokenness, and transform situations that seem impossible. So the next time you're faced with a challenge, don't rely on your own understanding. Don't look at the problem and think that it's too big for God. Instead, trust Him. Believe that He can do what you can't. And when you do, you'll begin to see His power at work in your life in ways that will leave you in awe. When you stop worrying about how everything is going to work out and trust that God has a plan, that's when the miraculous begins to unfold. It's not about knowing every step or having all the answers. It's about knowing that God is in control and that He will solve it in His perfect time and way. The pressure to control the outcome, to fix everything on your own can be overwhelming. But the moment you release it to God, that's when peace takes over. His timing, His ability, His power, they are greater than anything we could ever imagine. So trust Him. Let go of your need to have it all figured out and watch as He works in ways that will blow your mind. With God, there is no such thing as impossible. Keep believing, keep trusting, and know that He's already working on your behalf. You don't have to worry. God will solve it.